to the Wisdom of Odin. Here I am at the North Carolina Winter Gathering, and I want to make a small little video here because it kind of came up through conversation throughout this weekend as we've been performing these rituals and really evolving our ritual practice, and that is ritual clothing and garb and everything around that. So I really wanted to share with you kind of our evolution of that, because the last time I talked about this was probably 2 years ago when I talked about ritual garb, and this was just in my office without any ritual garb on, really. And so with this beautiful backdrop of the recently snow-capped mountain and the ritual garb I have on right now, I wanted to talk about this just a little bit with you. So drums actually aren't really part of ritual garb, but I do want to bring it up just because I do think it's something that if you're getting into paganism for the first time, or you're really wanting to evolve your practice, bringing in a drum to your practice would be a really good idea. Now, this is actually made by Caleb in the community, not the drum itself, but the painting on it, so he did a really good job, and it just has a really good deep bass sound. Now, this is just a Remo drum that he has painted. I think that's perfectly fine. That's how we started in the community for the most part. But building your own drum can be a really important experience, especially if you're wanting to dive deeper into shamanic practice. But I think a drum is going to be something that you can personalize for you. And drums are just one of those things that almost every culture on the planet have used drums to some degree. Now, when it comes to the specific Scandinavian, I don't believe there has been any evidence of drums found. However, chances are they probably use them because most cultures had some form of percussion instrument, but obviously you have things like the tagel harpa, the jaw harp, and then a few others that come specifically from Scandinavia, but I don't think you can go wrong with the drum within your ritual practice. Now let's move on to this so I can take it off my head as well. So the actual shamanic visor, I think this has a little bit of maybe scrutiny behind it because it's become very popular since Heilung started using them. In fact, I don't remember seeing them before Heilung started using it. And I have to admit, when I first saw this with them, I was like, I wonder why they do that. But if you actually look into global shamanic practice, it's very common for someone to have something covering their face. Now, I will say, I recently got back from a trip to Germany and Denmark, and in the Heidebu Viking Museum, they actually had this bear mask that I got to see with my own eyes, and this bear mask was worn for some form of ceremonial reasons. We don't know if it was for berserker rituals, which is why there's a question mark in this picture I was able to get of it, but it was used in some ritual capacity, we believe. Now, I guess it could be a children's because it is quite small. However, again, most cultures in the world have some form of tradition with mask covering the face, especially during spiritual ceremonies. And we see this in the evolution of Halloween. One of the reasons we dress up and have masks for Halloween is because of this tradition. I can't remember exactly what culture it came from. I'll put it up here if I can find it. But they wore masks to protect them from evil spirits. And within shamanic practice, the actual visor is to protect the eyes because those are the entrance to the soul from evil spirits possessing them. And so when you're doing a really intense ritual, something that's calling to the spirits or the gods, wearing a mask like this helps protect you. But also in a practical sense, if you're performing a public ritual, it removes the self. And so people can't really tell it's you. You become a kind of a spectral being here. So I really do think a visor is good for rituals, especially if you're out in the nature or you're doing something more public. I think a mask can become very important. Now, interestingly enough, the feathers here are something that I added just because it's something that connected to my spirit animal, my filgia, which is a turkey because they are turkey feathers. But they do actually have a spiritual connection. When I did the interview with Spirit of Wolf for my shamanism video, they actually talked about the fact that feathers were used and put on masks because then you can fly to the spirit world. And I love that. And so it's really cool to see that they have this tradition of putting feathers on their masks so they could fly. And it's just something I naturally came to the conclusion of. Now, you may be hearing the little jingling I have down here, and this is actually bells. So this is something I've recently added to my ritual garb here. That way when I walk, there's some noise to it. But bells, again, have a connection to global pagan practices, as bells have often been used as ways to either deter or summon spirits, or at least keep away bad spirits. And there is actually, I guess, more of a folklore myth that you should be wearing bells when you go out into the woods because it scares away certain animals from chasing you down. And so, this kind of goes into the modern practices as well. And it does have a practical purpose because if your goal is to avoid animals and spookies in the night, having noise to make, maybe it calls them to you, but also I think it deters, a lot of animals from attacking you. So maybe in the ancient past, people did this to actually protect them from the animals of the woods, as if you're making strange noises, they may be less inclined to come after you. I can't actually 100% confirm that, but it seems like a logical conclusion to why people may have bells around them or use bells in their ancient pagan practices. And so for me, coming into a ritual environment, I really enjoy having the bells because it just adds that ambience, that audio noise. And I think anytime we can engage any of the senses within a ritual environment, it really helps increase our connection. If you engage the smell with incense or sage, you increase the ambience with noise, with drums, with bells, and then you have your personal chanting. I think it's really going to add to the whole experience. In fact, I'm going to play a small clip for you here from a recent ritual we did using bells, using incense, and different elements to bring in a greater ambience. So I hope that makes sense. You know, I really do believe bringing in ambience and noise and bells and chimes really help. Now let's move on to the rest here. So as far as the furs, let's talk practicality of having fur on your ritual garb. It's cold out here. In fact, we were doing rituals until 11 o'clock last night when it started to snow. As you can see, again, there's literally snow on these mountains. That wasn't here yesterday. And so practically, it keeps you warm. This is rabbit fur I put together into like a vestment, and it actually helps keep me warm. And then I know people here have, you know, animal furs used to keep them warm. And this is obviously something that would have been used in the past, especially in the northern world. Now, as far as like wearing them in the summer, it might not make a lot of sense. However, if it just becomes part of your ritual garb, so be it. But really, animal furs definitely come out for me in the colder months because, again, they just help keep me warm when I'm performing rituals outside. Now, under this is going to be something that is personal preference. So me, I have a green tunic that I just purchased online. I didn't make it myself. It has a few elements that make it a Viking tunic, but really, this is going to be up to you. We do know that a priest class existed during the Viking Age within Scandinavia. We do have references of priest, and just because of global practices and you know, and evolutions of society, priest class almost always have separate robes, separate things that they use to determine who is a priest and who is not. And so to have ritual clothing is not out of the practice. And I think this is something I see a lot of people within the greater pagan or heathen world talking about, like, well, we don't have, you know, actual evidence of what they wore during ritual, so okay, what does that mean? You know, I think a lot of people get really, honestly, kind of dickish, douchey, gatekeepy about ritual clothes because it's like, oh, we don't have exact historical reference to exactly what they look like, and so therefore we go for it. But again, you know, and maybe it goes into the LARPing aspect. People are like, oh, you're just LARPing by buying a Viking tunic. Well, hey, it looks pretty cool. I enjoy it. It helps keep me warm. And again, it helps me set aside. If I'm just wearing, you know, a tank top and a t-shirt to a ritual, it's not going to make me feel very connected. And so having something to help separate me from, you know, my normal everyday, I think is something that helps me out. But again, I will say there are people that come to our rituals all the time. People have performed rituals here at the Fellowship of Northern Traditions in jeans and a t-shirt. And so it's whatever works best for you. But obviously I wanted to make this video. It's titled Ritual Clothing. And so that's what we're talking about. Anyways, on closing here, I do have a belt here as well that's, you know, just a non-normal belt, but it's whatever. It's just used to hold my knife and my mead horn here. And again, my people might be like, oh, that's a little LARPy. I don't really keep these for any ceremonial reason. I just keep them on my hip because it's convenient to have a knife on your hip, and it's convenient to have a mead horn on your hip when you're having a pagan gathering. And so having a knife and a mead horn combination on my hip, it's just really practical. And you just never know when you need easy access to your mead. Now, personally with me, I just have normal pants on because it's cold out and I need to stay warm. And I've never purchased ritual pants, but pants are one of those things where I don't really see a need to have ritual pants. But hey, you know, if that works for you, it works for you. Again, if you need that separation, that connection, then go for it. I'll also add here what I learned from Spirit of Wolf during my interview with them for shamanism. They typically keep their ritual clothes completely separate away from their normal clothes, going as far as hanging them up, you know, separately to keep that energy separate. And that's something I think is a good practice and something I'm actually starting to do myself, because it makes sense. You know what? I'm going to keep these separate from my normal everyday. That way it maintains that sacredness of the ritual clothing. And the same thing with shoes. I just got regular boots on right now because it's cold, it's muddy, and it's wet. And if I just had, you know, ritual shoes, which I looked at some ritual leather shoes, it was like $650. So I'm not going to spend $650 on some ritual shoes. And so I'm going to wear what's practical. But oftentimes I'll go barefoot. If it's not cold out or we have a really good fire, I'll go barefoot for rituals. It's just because it helps with that connection. And you see that in a lot of people that practice this faith today. You see that in the bands that practice this. I think every show I've seen of Wardruna and Heilung, no one is wearing shoes. They're almost always wearing it, just going barefoot. And I think it is to increase that connection. So in closing here, I just want to share one final thought. And again, this is ultimately going to be up to you. I do think basing things off of history or culture are a really good way to connect to your ancestors and to global pagan practices when looking into getting more connected to the gods and the rituals that you perform. However, it's something that should be an organic process. This is something that's taken me years to build. You know, I had to create this myself. It took me a long time to get this kind of tunic. For the longest time, I was just using a cheap robe that I have. And, you know, it's something that shouldn't be just forced. You know, do something that's practical. I needed furs because I needed to stay warm. I needed a belt to hold my bells when I walked around the ritual space because I wanted to call to the spirits. And this is something that took me years to do. So take your time doing it. Don't, you know, feel this is the problem with social media. You might want to get trendy and like, oh, everyone's got these great uniforms, or you might see this and you're like, oh, I want something like that. But don't feel, you know, peer pressured into doing it. I don't think it's something that should be rushed into. I think it's something that should be natural and organic for you and represent the journey you've been on. So thank you so much for joining me for this video. I hope this has been a fun rundown and small conversation around ritual clothing. I hope you've enjoyed this beautiful backdrop of this mountain here at this Fellowship of Northern Traditions gathering in North Carolina. If you're interested in learning more about this community, there's a link down below with all the gatherings we have coming up. At this moment, we're planning around 7 Yule gatherings, so there's a really good chance you might be able to attend one. So please head down below and check out the community. But other than that, if you want to support this channel, I do have a Patreon down below as well. So thank you so very much for joining me for this video of the beautiful snow-capped mountains in North Carolina. And until the hull, Skull. And then there's Logan and Mary sneaking away into the woods.